All right, folks, welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Today is a very special day. We're going to be talking about, everybody's going to be talking about what they've been learning. They will get 5 minutes. Please try to keep time. We've got about, at my rough count, about 15 different presentations on different topics. Okay, so so I'm very excited because what I have found is that talking about what you've been learning is the fastest way of learning. And you'll get multiple benefits from this. You will get, firstly, just organizing your thoughts is one thing. Second is that you'll get feedback from various people. We'll be doing, breakout rooms after that. And there is a lot. And it's just incredible list of topics here. So let me just tell you what's coming up. So Jairo is going to be talking about learning Tibetan. Laura is going to be talking about her teaching experience. Barry is going to be talking about positive disintegration. David is going to be talking about agent-based modeling. Joe is going to be talking about the criminal justice system. Let me see, I forgot the name here. Mike is going to be talking about risk management. Then there is going to be a presentation on insular cases by Miguel. Rich is going to be talking about the Raspberry Pi design. Donna is going to be talking about systems and design. Jyoti is going to be talking about Hindu philosophy. Kavi is going to be talking about the love of power. Robert is going to be talking about something, it'll come out to me. Dave is going to be talking about Ken Burns documentaries. Deborah is going to be having us draw a self-portrait in 5 minutes.
So you have to have a piece of
then
paper
next
and a
one,
pencil.
next up is going to be let's see, Victor. He's going to be talking about theory of music. Philip is going to be talking about grounding. Stephen is going to be talking about consciousness. Paul on comprehensivism, and Sanjay and Kevin are going to be talking about, Kevin is going to be talking about learning, and Sanjay is going to be talking about the limits of learning. Okay, and other people have come in like Jeff who are going to add more to this. So let's do one thing. I'm going to start with Sanjay. Sanjay, we ended with you, so I'm going to start with you about limits of learning. Folks, each of you have 5 minutes. You can go as little as 2 minutes, 2 to 5 minutes. All right. All right, Sanjay, take it away.
Sure. I don't know if this is going to go 5 minutes, but I'll talk as long as I, around 5 minutes maybe. So this is a topic that is near and dear to me because, that's something that I think all of us do. I definitely try to learn as much as I can. And I oftentimes run into, limits on how much I can learn and how easy and how, challenging it is to learn some topics. So I think, the way I thought about this is I thought of basically 3 different areas that affect how we learn, how we can learn. And, some of these are more practical, others are a little more theoretical. But first, to my mind, it came that there are limits on knowledge itself, which exist in us as beings, in us as being, sentient biological organisms, and primarily the limits of our knowledge. One question that arose is: are our limits of learning and knowledge based on our senses? Because everything that goes into our brain goes in through our senses. So somehow, do our senses affect what we can learn? That's one. Second is on knowledge itself. Are there theoretical limits on knowledge, that any being can have, or any being would be limited by? And third is again going back to our human self and the limits of our mind and what causes us to have not be able to learn certain things. So I guess first with our senses, we have limits, innate limits to our senses that we're born with, and we start to learn about them as we grow older. We start to learn about optical illusions and distortions of our senses, and our ability for us to sense parts of the universe that we know that exist, but our senses cannot detect them. Also, there are limits on our senses as we age. Our abilities degrade as we age. So these are the two main areas that I think I'll go into just briefly. Optical illusions we're all familiar with, that you sense, for example, if you're in a let's say a desert, and you have an illusion of an oasis, caused by shimmering light and the heat, and your brain tries to interpret the random fluctuations of light molecules, and it kind of puts it together into what you want there to be. You want there to be a little puddle or pool of water because you're very thirsty if you're lost in a desert, and you want there to be a tree or maybe even people, and your brain kind of creates the reality out of these random fluctuations. But really, that's, our eyes are not picking up this oasis in the desert. We're not seeing it. It's our brain that's doing it. So that's an example of an optical illusion. An example of distortions is when we're in the bitter cold, let's say, and you go to a slightly warmer environment, and all of a sudden, you start to feel extremely hot, even though it's not much hotter than, you're still cold, but you start to feel very hot. And that's an example where, our temperature sensing is distorted. Another example is after someone's drank alcohol, our ability to sense temperature actually degrades. So these are all distortions of our ability to sense temperature. Another inability for us to sense is, when we talk about that the universe is full of information. For example, in the visual sense, we know about color and light and text, texture and things like that. But in a more practical sense, we all are born with rods and cones in our eyes, and many people don't realize that some people are born with only two sets of two color cones, which causes color blindness. Most people are born with 3 color cones, and there are actually some people who are born with 4 color cones, and they're thought to have super sensory ability in terms of color perception. They can actually see more colors than most humans. Yet there are actually more colors than even those humans can see. We know ultraviolet, we know infrared, we know many other ranges. So our senses are limited in many senses, in many ways, and that obviously puts limitations on what we can perceive, what we can allow into our brain. Again, I'm thinking of this 5-minute limit, so I'm going to have to kind of truncate here and move on to the next area. Sorry. Limits on knowledge and our ability to learn things. I think there are limits. So, for example, there are limits on us as specific individuals and people, and then there are also limits on all of humanity. What's the maximum that the human potential can achieve, in terms of learning. And again, I'm not going to go into answers here. These are questions that I'm posing, and I want to present ways that people can maybe think about, and maybe in the future we'll have something further. So
Sanjay, can you wrap up in about 1 minute with a barrage of questions that people should think about their limits?
Sure.
Because I think the most valuable things are questions, because I think you've raised an important thing about what are our limits of knowledge. So go ahead. What are the questions people should think about?
So here's a question. So can we know the mind of God? Okay, Einstein asked this question. Can we know the moment of life, the moment that life originates? Can we know the moment that life ceases, of death? Can we really know those instantaneous moments? Can we know what another person knows? Okay, intuitively, really, really know what another person senses and knows. Is it possible for us to know what sensory overload is like? Is it possible for us to know what emptiness is like? What are there limits to our mind? One of the things I wanted to go into is language, because language, I think, forms a lot of what we're able to conceive of. I won't go into it, but for example, if we didn't have language, would that limit what we could learn? A person who never learns a language, would it limit them? On the other hand, if we had a very sophisticated language like mathematics, if everybody knew mathematics, which can theoretically explain almost anything, would that allow us to learn almost anything? What about concepts that are so complex? For most of us don't have very advanced mathematics, but multidimensional aspects of the universe. How can we learn that? Another aspect is that in learning, we need to be able to hold multiple ideas in our mind simultaneously. And most of us can keep 2 or 3 ideas simultaneously in our mind. Some can keep 4. Very few people can keep 5 or more ideas, but that's a limitation. So, how much does that pose limitations on each of us? So let me stop there.
Wonderful. Excellent. Thank you very much, Sanjay. So what we're going to do is that we are going to continue on this theme of learning. So we're going to go to Kevin next. He's going to be talking about learning. Then we will go to Paul. He's going to be talking about his approach to comprehensivism. Then we will go to Laura, who's going to be talking about her teaching experience. And then we will go to Jairo, who's learning Tibetan, and he's going to be talking about the experience of learning a language like a Tibetan. Okay, so next up is Kevin. Kevin, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Shrank. And that's good to follow similar topic. Follow Sanjay. We have limitation for our knowledge, our time, energy. Everyone different. So my topic is about learning how to learn. That's big topic. Let's start it simple. Let's start simple the math. When you first time learn a number, how do you count from 1 to 10, then more? Then next, you start, let's see, can we get 2 number, then plus 1 operator, then get it out? Further, can we abstract this? Let's 2 numbers, I consider is input. Input first. Second one, for operator, I will consider is actionable. It's, let's see, the plus, minus, even further, mathematic. Then here is what's the result. Between the result, let's see, you call for math, we got even complicated, equal, bigger, greater than, blah, blah. Here, let's see the same concept to get you boring. Let's for math. Can we learn the math in applying same concept to other subject? For example, recently I want to buy 1 chair. Let's say I shopping around, buy the chair. Then here, I bought 1 chair from Costco, but 1 box. That's my input. Input the chair. Then here I need, let's say, open the box. Then set up, they got tools, got lots of parts. How to assemble this chair. This my action. You see, it's like operator in a math. And here, end of the product is a full chair. Let's go in deeper. Let's see, I need to split the sub project. Let's see, from top back, the chair back parts, parts for the middle of the seat, and parts for the legs and wheels, extra. Since time is limited, let's just open your mind for your imagination. Let's move to next. I would say that's for, let's see, theoretic normal our routine. Let's see how about for the micro world. We know H2, that's from chemistry, right? Is plus O2, you're going to equal H2O. Let's see the middle, what's between the action, like we use, what's the operator? We need the action. Because follow the same concept, input, actionable, operational in the middle, then output, result. That's another one. The first, let's see, use water, let's see, right? They changed from a physics, this water got 3 states, from solid to liquid water to the gas, steamed one. And you see here, from solid one to the water, you need melting water. Then from water to the steam one, evaporation. Then another one, let's say, can we, from the output to input, let's see, from steam gas to a liquid, you need condensation. Then from liquid to solid, for the freezing one, you need put a solid. That's already changing the unit. You see the bidirection.
Kevin,
Even further,
you have about a minute to wrap up. Go ahead.
Okay. Even further, there's another. Let's see. Can we from solid directly go to gas? Also, it's happened. How beautiful the natural world. You think further. Let's see. This input, action, and the output. They go into iteratively. You're going to small, micro. We can't do anything based this. The question is here. Normally, we only learn. I want to learn this. We never consider. I don't see. Never say never. Okay. We lack or consider what's the input, what current knowledge unknown. Then we learn something unknown. We need to prepare the information and need learn something we already have, like a method and some techniques. That's my presentation today. Thank
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Really appreciate that. So next we are going to go to Paul on his take on comprehensivism, Laura on her teaching experience, and then Jean talking about how best to help kids learn. Okay, Paul, go ahead.
Okay, so for a few weeks and a few months, we were talking about comprehensivism. So my thinking and my idea about that is something like this. Comprehensive view of the world will start with anybody should start with anybody, or that definitely started with me in my early education. I was in my early years. I was lucky enough that I started my education in continental Europe, and even that it was socialist Czechoslovakia, the system was there still continental German system. So everything compared to English, typical English system of education, it was systematized. History, geography, physics, everything started somewhere and was going somewhere else. I never studied here in Canada or in the States, but I've been talking to people who are working for me. There is no system, and which I'm really surprised that they are that very educated people, but they don't have system behind that. The individualism is much stronger here than in Europe, and individualism will bring faster and better result in that in particular field. But generally, the object of whole system is not there. That's why people are so uneducated generally. When I compare my knowledge, which is very general knowledge, but I know almost about everything compared to, I can argue with stranger, I can argue with Shrikan, I can argue with many other people, because I always try to systemize everything. I am really surprised how of the lack of the general education which is in our country, in my new country, or in states. For example, Shrikan, you were talking about Leonardo da Vinci as polymath, but in this same day, in the 16th century, much more important than Leonardo da Vinci was Copernicus, was Luther. Those were those are the systems which we call planetary system because of Copernicus. That's the general comprehensive system which is with us until now, and we will continue in that way. People are very confused that with amount of information, but just try to make some kind of system of it. I try to understand that our brain won't be able to understand 100% everything, not in how high we are, where we are now. Who understand 100% internet? I don't think that anybody, because it works on its own. Who understand the invisible hand of the market, as Adam Smith predicted? Nobody, and it works. But how come it works? Not that we are not able to organize it. It will organize itself. There is some kind of moral transcendental law which Kant will start talking about in the 18th century. And that system, if we all try to understand that system. Doesn't matter if it's that way or that way, not political system. Just generally to get more education, and we will all be better.
Wonderful, Paul. Thank you. I think that's a great thought. I certainly think that U.S. education is very disintegrated. So it's all about kind of, in order to grasp things, you have to kind of systematize it. That's the only way to hold things and to use things. Otherwise, you're kind of a butterfly, just saying, oh, there is something, there is something. This is all about kind of building together. I like Francis Bacon's take on this. He says, human being is not like a butterfly, going from flower to flower. It's not like a spider who kind of from within puts something and draws, puts together a web. It's more like a bee where you collect everything and then arrange it together in a beehive so that you can actually, you take knowledge, you collect knowledge, collect all the data, and then you go ahead and arrange it in a form that is going to be useful to you. Thank you very much. Next up is going to be Laura. And Laura is going to be talking about her 25 years of experience teaching and what she got from it. Laura, you got 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Oh, you got to be kidding. 25 minutes, 25 years and 5 minutes.
Yes, that's about right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I graduated from college and started teaching immediately thereafter in math. I walked into this classroom not having a clue what to expect. The kids, they come in, it's after the summer, they didn't really study for this placement exam, so they wound up in this course. A lot of them were angry because it was a high school level course and they had passed the course and didn't want to be there and was miserable. So anyway, after a couple of days, I realized that they belonged in the course because they literally knew nothing. And how could they not know nothing after, learn in school for 2 years learning algebra? It seemed impossible to me. And so I went ahead and I decided, well, I'm going to teach. I'm going to do every single problem. I'm going to do it in detail so that they have worked examples to follow from when they do their homework. And I graded every single problem because I wanted to make sure that they understood that their homework had value and that they could learn from it. And I wrote notes on their homework. And we proceeded. They took tests. They did pretty well on the little units. But then when I gave them like a mid, term, they blew it. And the same thing on the final. And I realized that they did because now the problems were all mixed up and they didn't have a clue what they were doing. So I realized that I have to give them sort of the what and the how, because I had to teach them how to identify problems so that then they could attach the knowledge about how to solve the problem to the what. So I spent a lot of time having them identify what kind of problem they were working with. So that rendered some improvement, and that made me feel like I had some grasp on how to help them to learn. So I went along with that for a while. And then our course was broken up into units. 2 were procedural math, and the 3rd were verbal problems. And that was the killer unit. That was basically the unit that everybody failed multiple times. They didn't know how to solve a verbal problem to save their lives. And we provided textbooks that didn't really provide any kind of valuable thing. So I really didn't know anything about education. I was sort of eking my way through this based on, whatever I could find and whatever made sense to me. So again, tried to work with them to let's look at the problem, let's think about it, that sort of thing. But I wasn't really providing the right sort of thing. And I'm in graduate school at this point and in math, actually. So I wasn't really getting any kind of anything in education. I had no input. So whatever I did, I just tried to do the best I could. My kids weren't doing slam dunk work. And it wasn't until I started going to graduate school myself in education that I began to get an education sort of the more theoretical things. And I started studying Polya and began to understand the art of problem solving. And that's when I began to learn about metacognition. And I began to learn more about the what and the how. And so in beginning to learn about the what and the how, I began to understand about asking questions about problems to yourself to develop a line. You needed to develop a language in your own head to guide yourself through the problem solving process. That was really the key, that you could solve any problem if you could really talk to yourself and gather information and begin to identify things and not, it was okay to take your time. It was okay if you made mistakes. It was okay to just work through the problem in a systematic way, asking yourself questions, setting up the questions, understanding what kind of procedural mathematics you needed to solve the problem, look at the result, think if it makes sense relative to the problem, the statement of the problem. And at that point in my, graduate studies, Carnegie Mellon came across the street and said, we developed this AI system in algebra for a high school, and we'd like to see how it works with the remedial college students. And the vice chair, I had been talking to him throughout the time I've been in the department a lot, and he told me about it, and he asked me if I wanted to check it out, which I did, and it was an incredible experience because that software provided the what, and also provided just-in-time assistance as you solve the problem, going through that process of identifying variables and setting up equations and so forth. And also, so I liked it. I said I wanted to do it. And okay, so now you need a computer lab. And my God, the attitude of the faculty was just awful. Oh, this is the calculus lab. We can't have these kids in the calculus lab. I mean, it's like they had cooties or something, but eventually we wore them down and we got to use the lab. And the kids, 20 diskettes that it came in those days. So kids came with little boxes with 20 diskettes, and we had them set up. And the kids started working with it, and they loved it. And they would actually get stars when they had accomplished. And winning those stars was amazing. It gave them such a rush of confidence. And that's all these, there's a whole other side to this teaching thing about developing confidence with these students, because they don't have it. They don't get it at home. They didn't get it in school. They never had anybody there for them that said, it's okay, come on, I'll help you out. Don't worry about it. We'll get there And I did that for them. And I think that was a very important part of, if I did anything to help with these students, other than to try and give them a different way about thinking about how to do mathematics, it was that I provided someplace where they could go and get help and not be embarrassed about it. And, I just, as I said, I honored their work. I graded it. I gave them a sense that it was important. It wasn't just, crap to do and why bother kind of thing. And eventually I developed a course called Quantitative Literacy Through Algebra. And that became the Algebra One textbook. And it was a textbook that contained problems, a long story problem. And next was a worked example where I actually articulated the metacognitive strategy out loud. Like, what do we need to think? What kind of problem is it? What do we have? What do we know? What do we need to know? And so all of that was articulated for them in the worked example. And then I gave the students a similar problem that they worked on in groups. And the reason we did groups is because it was found that it actually helped students improve their learning. And we all know that works. So they did that. And when they first started, they had no idea what to do, and their hands were always up in the air. And then by the end of the semester, they could care less whether I was anywhere near them. And in fact, one day a professor was walking near the room, which was a dedicated math classroom, and he heard all this noise and he couldn't understand what was going on. Who was in that classroom? Maybe a history class or something. And it was my math class, and these students were making noise about doing math, solving a problem. They were excited about it because the purpose of these, the thing that was the trick with these problems, in these problems, they always had to invent something that belonged to them, that was part of the problem. So you want to start a business. Okay, so what business do you want to start? Oh, you want that kind of business? Great. You want this kind of business? Great. So the problem became something of their own, and they enjoyed it. And so that course turned out to be a very valuable experience for them. it wasn't like typical algebra. Nobody saw a book that said remedial math on it that kept making them feel like they were lesser in some way. It had actually a very fancy title. It was a very skinny little book. It wasn't one of these heavy, large books. And, you know, they got a lot out of it. I think I mentioned the other day, I had kids coming back to me
Laura,
later on.
this is,
Okay,
Laura,
I'm done.
this is amazing. This was fantastic. This is fantastic. I could listen to it a lot more, but let's do one thing. We'll do a special on kind of teaching, and we'll get you as a panelist. So we'll be able to learn more, because this is really amazing stories. And folks, I also very highly recommend Polya's book, How to Solve It. It's one of the, you know, it's a gem, and you'll learn a lot from it. So recommend it very highly. Thank you, Laura. Just amazing, amazing story. Thanks. Next up is going to be Jean. Jean, go ahead. Jean, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So so it's along with what Laura talked about. I'm actually researching on how to help kids to learn and motivate them. You have two kids, 12 and 15, and especially my 12-year-old, he's complaining it's boring. My 15 years old, I think he's not fully fulfilled his potential. So I'm luckily found this book called Prepared. I think I found a lot of answers about how to motivate kids and learn why the current education system doesn't do the work it's supposed to do. So this is about California school, and they do this. They started school as project-based learning and tech school, and they were able to get kids with various background, various income, family. It's not great foundation, but they all graduate. They were like 95% of kids go to full-year college, and they have great result. And the reason I found out is they start this project-based learning with self-direct learning process, which students set goals, make plans, and implement plans. Then they show what they have done. And at the end, they also reflect the result with a trusted mentor. So they do this kind of cycled learning process during the school year with various type of projects. So it's, I also listened to the Jordan Peterson mentioned, you know, like when it's quite interesting when a person has a goal, it actually creates some kind of chemical in our brain, actually gave us excitement and meaning. And also when you try to help someone, you cannot push, even with people with psychological damage, you cannot push them. They have to be willingly to try the new things. So I think the current education system, the problem is that it's lectured to kids. Kids just sit there and listen, and they memorize, then they do homework. So they're not engaged, you know, like they're not initiate themselves. So this is the difference between project-based learning and traditional school teaching. And also another movie is called Most Likely to Succeed, also mentioned how our current education system is actually like the factory. So it's like produce the factory workers, basically. So they use the same type of work, educate the same people. They even the bell at school is resemble the factory. So it's quite amazing. And we already live in the information age. So the knowledge we learn doesn't really relevant when the kids get older. So what they really need to learn is not the knowledge, it's how to learn. And this is not what traditional teaching teach them, not the problem solving, you know, not the learning process, but also just the knowledge. You know, you can cover a lot of knowledge, but you don't really know how to learn yourself. So I found, so the book also touched why a lot of people knows the current education system doesn't work, and they know project-based learning is work so much better, not just for students, but also for teachers. Teachers have more satisfaction doing this type of teaching, and they are happier. the problem is that it's much harder to do. So as we know, the current, the teacher, I think, need a lot more training and understanding of the subject. If they can really integrate into a project, which they can also help kids to develop certain skills through doing the project. And when this schoolmaster trying to start a new school, she was looking into this project-based learning project and found it's super expensive to buy it from outside company. So she ended up to research with the teacher and also invite a lot of experts to work with them to develop their own curriculum. So she understands why it's not widely applied in different schools. So this is really helpful, I think, for me to understand why the kids are not happy. I don't think it's easily to change the school, but what we can do at home, I think, is the first step is goal setting. Help them to find their goal. It's also interesting, Jordan Peterson mentioned how the student performs so differently just by setting a goal, what they want and what they don't want in 3 years. And in the end, they progress so much better. So I think helping them set a goal and have a plan and implement the plan and helping them along the way and check into them, I think is the first step to help them to start this project-based learning at home. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jean. That was great observations. I want to say that, what project-based learning does is that it firstly focuses on action and motivation. It kind of integrates kind of learning, motivation, and action into one thing. So people are doing things. So whatever they learn, they're actually applying it, and they're doing it in the context of something that they are passionate about. So there are these multiple feedback loops going, and that's really the way of, getting knowledge, because this is the knowledge which is useful and it is motivated learning, which actually, if a person is motivated, they can learn very, 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 very fast. And if they're not motivated, you kind of are trying something, but it's not going through. So beautiful points. Thank you. So what we are going to do now is we're going to go to the next theme. Hiro, I'll come to you in the in a future sequence. The next sequence we're going to be talking about. So first sequence we talked about learning. The second sequence we're going to talk about philosophy, and it's going to be 4 things. One is Jyoti is going to be talking about Hindu philosophy. Then Philip, then Stephen is going to be talking about consciousness. Philip is going to be talking about grounding, and Barry is going to be talking about positive disintegration. All right, so this is a philosophy unit, and then we'll go to the next unit after that. All right, so Jyoti, you're next. Jyoti, go ahead.
Yeah.
You unmute, yeah.
So I was going to talk about Hindu philosophy, Hindu ways of living, thinking, and with spiritual connection. So I read all about the Hinduism, mostly from a very holy spiritual book called Bhagavad-Gita. I don't know if you know about it. But Gita is about a discourse that's taking place between Lord Krishna and Arjuna, who is afraid to fight in a big battle of Kurukshetra. And neither he wants to fight nor he wants to kill anybody. So Lord Krishna is explaining to him the concept of eternal divinity, or he is explaining to him, your soul is eternal. You will not die. So he's not understanding about that. So he gives him an example of sun and sunshine, and he says, when the sun is at one particular location, the sunshine reaches everywhere, and it illuminates everything on the earth, in the universe. Similarly, in your heart, there is a little atomic atomic soul, which is called Atma or soul, individual soul, that is being nurtured by your consciousness. And your whole body is a living entity or material entity, and your soul is helping to achieve the goals that or desires that your whole body wants. Along with that, you also have a friend of soul, which is called supreme or super soul. The super soul is the one that is not only in you, but it is also prevalent outside in the universe and in other people. So you must have heard Sri Khan saying from time to time in Hindus when they greet each other, that's one, my God is greeting your God. That's because it's in you and everywhere, it prevails everywhere. So Krishna is getting very confused and he says, how can that be possible? Then he gives him another example. He said, look at this tree. On the tree, you see two birds. One is sitting down, one is sitting up. The sitting down, the sitting down bird is very, very keen on eating all the fruits, hopping from tree to tree. She's having good time. But now a point has come, she is very anxious and now she's suffering. And now she's saying, I got everything I wanted, and why I'm not happy, why I'm suffering. And then she says, oh, I do have a bird who's my friend. The bird up there is Parameshwara or the God. And the function of the God, the bird's function is to witness, to observe what this subordinate bird is going on doing. So she says to him, I want to connect with you. And how she's going to connect with this God, because she has already forgotten about him, but God is very merciful. He says, you can connect with me. All you have to do is just relinquish all your likings, desires, and materialistic things that you have been doing all your life and connect with me. I will be with you and I am in you. So that is the concept of consciousness. Consciousness is something that we all have in us, and we tend to forget that it is there. But when it's time for the person to sit back and see what I did in my life, whether I was happy or unhappy, then he thinks about, I think I have done everything, and if I have done something wrong, I need to be with God. So that's what the Hindu philosophy of life is, basically. So I think I have added everything that I wanted to say about consciousness. And I will add one point, people who are not understanding, Americans, Westerners who don't understand about the concept of consciousness, they know the Maslow hierarchy of needs. The last need is self-actualization. And in other words, consciousness is self-actualization, that you sit back and you reflect and you say, no, I want to reach my potential in my life. Thank you.
Thank you, Jyoti. I think that West has certain strengths and the East has certain strengths. I mean, the way I see it at a kind of a grand level, there are three large cultures which have been around for a very long time. One is India, second is China, and the third is the West. And they're about the same size. And each of them has their own strengths. So for example, West is unparalleled in its transformation of the world, understanding of the physical world and transforming of that, growth of science, growth of technology, industrial revolution. West has done wonders. We have long lifespan as a result of that. China is amazing in terms of its concept of health, I think, or balance, that yin yang. I think, I don't understand China very well, but that I think is, as best as I understand it, that's like a core idea of the culture, which is kept in mind all the time, which neither West or India has in that great a depth. The strength of India is consciousness. It's a culture that has been focused on consciousness for a very long time, for like 5,000 years. And so the entire kind of whole range of things that India has to offer is amazing on that. So one of the people that I respect in the West is Jung, for example, because he's one of the people who is a pioneer in kind of getting some of the Indian thought into psychology. So I look forward to doing kind of things in the future on both India and China, where we can learn together about those. Now we're going to go to Stephen talking about consciousness, Philip talking about groundedness, and then Barry about positive disintegration, and then Julie is going to be talking about a topic in psychology as well. So we'll put them all, in one unit, and then we'll go to the next unit. So Stephen, go ahead.
Thank you. Another good segue from geodesy. Growing up, I wasn't much of a reader, and I was certainly motivated in school to learn and was determined to obtain a degree in higher education, which I did from SUNY Buffalo, getting a bachelor's in psychology, and later, in my 30s, a master's in public health from Boston University. But it wasn't until my mid to late 20s that I think I really developed a genuine passion for learning. And now I have a pile of books on my nightstand that some of which I've read and some I'm hoping to read, including Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, several books on Stoicism, and Fathoms the World in the Whale. And this Meetup 52 Living Ideas has certainly added to that heap. My partner and I are big fans of the great courses. Some of you might know it as its former name, The Teaching Company. And we started way back when they produced cassettes. Remember what those are? Put them in a Walkman. And in preparation, so at 7:30 every night, we watch a lecture. In preparation for this talk, and after I decided what I'd talk about, I looked through our collection, which includes the foundations of Western civilization, the history of English language, understanding the quantum world, among many others. And just as a plug for the great courses, I have tons of cassettes. If anybody's interested, I'll send them for free, just shipping and handling. So we're listening now to another lecture, but before I get on to that, you could probably, if you look through our collection, see there's a theme. My partner especially likes anything about language and linguistics and complex scientific areas such as string theory. I'm drawn to learning about the history of places we've been or would like to visit, including Greece and Rome, South America, and Egypt. But my interests have expanded beyond psychology to include philosophy, history, science. I recently learned of Friends of SEP Society, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So if anybody's into philosophy, that's a really excellent resource. So we're currently listening to Mind Body Philosophy, in which Patrick Grimm, a professor from SUNY Stony Brook, attempts to answer what is consciousness? Does it even exist? And other questions around the mind-body problem. To what extent is the mind and body separate entities or one and the same? Is the mind part of the body or the body part of the mind? If they're distinct, then how do they interact? What is it that allows them to work together so seamlessly? Which of the two is in charge? How much of our existence is defined by our physical substance versus our mental reality? Materialists, like Epicurus, thought that only the body exists and there's no such thing as the mind. Idealists, like Plato, thought everything is controlled by the mind, and dualists, like Descartes, believed that there were two kinds of substance: matter, of which essential property is that it is spatially extended, and mind, of which the essential property is that it thinks. While watching this particular episode, my partner voiced, "I'm definitely a materialist," while I, on the other, pondered the thought and probably would label myself a dualist. So let me elucidate by sharing my personal experience. As a person who suffers from chronic pain, I treat it with medication, including cannabis and ibuprofen. I also meditate and exercise, Bikram yoga and swimming on a regular basis. Anybody who suffers from physical pain knows firsthand that it interferes with your mental function. When in pain, I'm often irritable or can't focus. But when I meditate, and I don't simply do so as a means of eradicating my pain, but as a means of clearing my mind, which leads to a reduction in physical pain. Research has even shown that all types of yoga and meditation do just that. So the physical body certainly affects the mind and vice versa. So perhaps Plato is right and my pain is all in my head. Maybe I'll become an idealist, or perhaps more realistically, simply work to become more aware, mindful, conscious of my existence, sensations, thoughts, surroundings, and let go of the negative thoughts.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I really appreciate that. Consciousness is a kind of a perennial interest in this meetup. So we look forward to keep coming back to it. Next up is going to be Philip with grounding, and then Barry with positive disintegration, and then Julie. So go ahead, Philip.
Okay. Yeah, so this is my first time in this meeting. I didn't actually prepare anything, but I can talk a little bit about a paper that we went over. I also have a philosophy group, by the way, and we go over philosophy papers. And one paper that's very fascinating was the paper that we covered last 2 days ago on Monday. It was a paper by Rosen. I think the paper's name is called Grounding and Reduction, right? The basic idea of the philosophy of grounding is that philosophers want to really explicate this idea that how did I put this? Well, oftentimes when we try to explain something in terms of something else, right? That's the idea of grounding, right? When philosophers try to, like, let's suppose you ask a physicist why the sky is blue, right? The physicists would tell you, well, the sky is blue is because of the kind of microphysical structure that is in the cloud, that these microphysical structure, the properties of these microphysical structure, with their laws of nature and with the interaction by the sun, produces some effect that produces some sort of reaction, and we see the blue sky. So you have one set of phenomena, that the act of seeing the sky as blue and the blueness of when you see the sky, and you have all these facts about physics. You're explaining one set of facts, one of phenomenal experience to another set of facts, one of a description from science, from physics. So this is the concept of grounding, that when you're trying to explain one set of facts with another set of facts, and that through this process, you kind of, the person kind of get an understanding of the phenomenon, right? Another very interesting example of grounding is explaining mental phenomenon, or for example, explaining grounding mental phenomenons to physical phenomenons, right? Suppose a mental phenomenon example of mental phenomenon would be, being in pain, or feeling joy, or feeling happy, like so. And well, a lot of philosophers say that, okay, these kind of phenomena are grounded in physical phenomena in the brain. So whenever, let's say, you feel pain, then something in our brain there's a physical change in our brain, physical facts that are physical changes. So that's interesting. That's pretty much it. Let me see.
That's fine.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. This is an important topic of saying, okay, what is the basis of what you have, whether it is concepts, emotions, and you're trying to kind of go down and figure out, where it comes from and what's the basis of it. So wonderful. Next up is going to be Barry with positive disintegration. Barry, so what is positive disintegration?
Positive disintegration is a theory developed by a fellow by the name of Drabonsky. And he was a psychologist in the 1960s, and he was involved in the Nazis in the 40s, 30s and 40s, and he had to escape Poland to get away from the persecution there. And so he came up with a theory by observing especially gifted individuals that he noticed that they have what they call 5 overexcitabilities. They were overly sensitive. They were physically, psychomotor, he called it. They had extreme imaginations. They could come up with all kinds of ideas and dreams. They were highly intellectual. They read a lot, and they had a lot of, like all you people here. And fifthly, they were intensely emotional. So I have a master's degree in electrical engineering from Purdue, and I work for a utility or government utility in the Pacific Northwest called Bonneville Power. And it owns the electricity that is generated on the hydroelectric dams on the Columbia River and one nuclear plant in Hanford in Richland, Washington. And it transmits this power all over the Northwest and into California and over 15,000 miles of high voltage lines. So behind me, you see a picture of the Bonneville Dam from an aerial viewpoint. On the right, you see the dam. And then at the top where the little circle is, that's the generator. And then you see the transmission lines. And then you see on the far left, my house. And down at the bottom is me doing yoga. And on the left side is my apple tree in my backyard and my grandchildren playing in a swing under my apple tree. In the middle is a picture of me to illustrate the power of positive disintegration. So power of positive disintegration is getting rid of all those bad habits that give you anxiety, give you frustration, make you angry, and replacing them with something that is more your personality. It's becoming your authentic self. And in his theory, he found there were 3 dynamisms that cause us to be who we are. Heredity, or it could be society, or it could be autonomous choice of who we want to be. And he said that those people that have these overexcitabilities have the potential of becoming whoever they want to be. And he used some examples from history, Jesus Christ or Eleanor Roosevelt, Gandhi, all these famous people have reached what they call, maybe you would call it in Eastern philosophy, enlightenment or self-actualization, if you use Dr. Maslow's theory. But he called it, he had 5 different levels. And he believed most people are on level 1 and they're just and they're more influenced by their biological needs, okay? So here I am an electrical engineer. I learned how to represent the power system on the computer at Purdue, and I spent 31 years. I wrote 2 books. I wrote one book called let's see if I can get that here. Yeah, the power quality primer. It's about how dirty power affects our computers. And then I used to design power transformers, and I wrote a book on energy efficient transformers. And then I wrote a book on, I edited a book on how to make your power system more efficient. So I took that concept of the power system and I said, oh, why don't I use that as an engineer as a representation of me? And so, so I use the concept that my emotions are like the water behind the Bonneville Dam. Now, when my wife died in 2014, I relied on her for emotional support, and that dam no longer was under control, and so I was flooded with all kinds of emotions, and I needed somebody to control that floodgate because the emotions generate the electricity that goes through the turbine, and that generates our thoughts, our intellect, and then we sense through our meters, our 5 senses, and then it goes on our transmission system, which I show in my picture behind me, our nervous system. And then we use our different parts of our body, and that controls what I call the loads, or the psychomotor part of your body. What I found out, I took a test, and I have all 5 of these overexcitabilities, and it really made it difficult to make some kind of sense out of myself and how I was reacting to the situation. So I, being a power system engineer, I decided to treat it as a system. And so consequently, I started doing series of paintings that illustrate these concepts and writing poems that explain these concepts. I see a painting as a blueprint. I see my poems are the specifications. And then I write in my journal and I'd say that's my operating manual. And so then I would engineer my own power system and become the person I wanted it to be. And so as a consequence, I had to disintegrate those old things, those old engineering ways of thinking. And then I took up yoga, I took up painting, I took up poetry, and I took up playing the piano, and I do all those things every day. And this is great because the positive disintegration often results to people, especially people that are excitable to some traumatic incident like a pandemic or like a loss of a loved one. And this puts us under tremendous stress. And so as a consequence, you have to disintegrate the way you did things before, because I relied on my wife and she was no longer there to provide me the emotional support. So I wrote a poem, and it's called Flow On, Berry, Flow On. Flow on, berry, flow on. Flow on, berry, flow on. Your power makes me strong. So flow on, berry, flow on. Your floodgates I let my wife control. When she left, you did overflow. I could not control your raging flow. Flow on, berry, flow on. Other people drain power from you, parents, peers, preachers too, pedagogues, professionals, and progeny too. Flow on, berry, flow on. Drabansky's vision would not let me rest. A better me he saw growing in my chest. My overexcitabilities, and I did the rest. So flow on, berry, flow on. It's on your banks I fought many a fight. I would lay in bed almost every night. I saw my wife's death, but not in fright. So flow on, berry, flow on. At Bonneville Power, I saw power system deficiencies, told utilities how to improve their system efficiencies. Now I create ways to use my potential energies. So flow on, berry, flow on. Now your floodgates I let God control, that he may create in me who I want to flow. Like the His son, caring and calm, I wish to grow. So flow on, Barry, flow on. Many mighty men try to get me to conform, but with a renewed mind, I will transform my gifts into creative outlets. I perform. So flow on, Barry, flow on.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Barry. That was just delightful. That was just delightful. And that's what comprehensivism is all about, kind of taking ideas, taking inspirations and putting them together like this, you know, using kind of the systems that you have, like the power systems. I'm an electrical engineer, to start with. So I very much kind of appreciate it. And it's a very powerful analogy of all the loads and the feedback loops and the control systems and, the shunts and everything. So it beautifully goes and applies to psychology. So thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes. So next up is going to be Julie. And what we're going to do after Julie is that we will do breakout rooms for about 20 minutes, and then we'll come back to do the second part with all the remaining presentations, so people can discuss the presentations so far. So Julie, go ahead.
Oh, okay, hi. Barry, I love that. I was in a doctor's office and I was reading an article about a woman who had won the Nobel Prize for discovering something with AIDS. And she did it by watching this sheep herd sheep and watching that relationship. And that's where she saw the relationship in our immune system. And it's like, I thought, my mind, that's how my mind works. I like to take truths I find out in one situation, a microcosm, and then take them and apply them somewhere else to see if they stand up, or sometimes to get me past my own blind spot. Anyway, I want to, I've been a very miserable person since I was about 14. And I think naturally I am a polymath and I'm naturally very curious. A lot of my curiosity has come through pain of trying to figure out how I landed where I landed at 14 years old. So I'm going to share a couple of things about fear that have helped me immensely. First of all, I want to say that I really believe if there's the evil, it is fear. Fear has gone rampant. It's something that's just caused a lot of problems in our world. And when I witnessed my mother through all my life, when she was in her music, which she knew she wanted to do from the time she was 2, and it was bigger than her fear. She went to New York when women didn't do that, and 1 out of 600 women. And late in life, she found teaching. But on the other hand, when she wasn't in her music, she had 5 husbands. She had issues, big time. But I kept watching that transformation of when doing your purpose work in life. I going to be my answer. Anyways, I was very promising child. I wrote books and plays, and when I just don't know why. And I had a very supportive environment, like a flower, learning to be, I was just in flow. There's a concept of flow some of you might be familiar with, but you forget yourself and you're just at one with whatever you're learning about, and you're expanding and growing all the time. Unfortunately, most people don't have a gardener like that. They end up trying to be in somebody else's gardener, and they don't know what kind of flower they end up, like myself, because at 14, I went from the most climbing a trajectory to falling in 2 short months to a place where I couldn't even speak anymore. It was tied to marijuana, and it was tied to fear and being bullied. And I've been trying to get back to that freedom and possibility I knew at 12 and 13 years old. Course in Miracles finally helped me a bit, because I also retreated into my head because it was something stable I could hold on to. I really respected a well-founded point of view, because it seemed to me the world was full of hypocrisy and people that didn't even know what they were talking about. And I couldn't get anybody to talk to me about it. They told me I think too much. So I took it all very personally and made a couple of decisions that there must be something wrong with me when there wasn't. But thereafter, I saw many situations I would conclude there must be something wrong with me. Course in Miracles finally taught me that what I believe to be truth and how the world works is that people are either coming from love or fear, and fear is an appeal for love. And fear, think about it. Fear I know the side of me that comes from fear. Julie with a small J, she's greedy, all mine, mine, mine. She's if you get a promotion, I'm jealous. I don't feel good for you. It's a mentality of scarcity. I want you to fix me. I need somebody to fix me. I'm looking outside for something to fix me. And then I know myself coming from a place of love, the higher part of me, which is generous. I'm giving because I'm not worried about tomorrow. I'm in the moment. I'm taken care of. It's very much in the now. If you get a promotion, I'm happy for you. There's abundance, infinite possibility. So life is what it did become a point of how do I get myself into that higher place more of the time? And I found tools. I still haven't totally passed this because I am very, very prisoned by my fear still. But the Course in Miracles also, it helped me a lot with the bully bosses I had. When I looked at those bully bosses as people that were coming from fear and acting out inappropriately, it really, I gave my power away at 14 is what happened. I gave my power to others and decided they were more important to me. I stopped coming from an aligned place. And so Course in Miracles has taught me how to get my power back. At any given choice, I have a choice whether to see your innocence or your guilt. And if I forgive you, I forgive myself. If I crucify you, I crucify myself. Because, and this is what I really think, is that the world is based on some premises that are wrong, like we are separate. Quantum physics is showing we're not separate at all. The golden rule really is the golden rule. What I do to you, I do to me. And if we could just straighten out the world, we are not separate. And look, to start over from a unified place, it would change everything. But people have a resistance to new ideas, and they don't want to see that, there's no real end where I end and you begin. So the life, the world is mostly fear-based. All the ads, people end up spending their entire life trying to unlearn the lies that they bought into as a child from bad parents or society. But on the spectrum, to me, I'm not sure how it works, but I believe that if you totally get rid of the fear, that's when you have flow and you become one at whatever you're doing, because concern for self, when you're thinking about yourself, you have fear. When you become one with whatever you're doing, you are a channel, like Saint Assisi's prayer. And anyway, okay.
Thank you, Julie. Julie, that was. You want to wrap it up in the next 30 seconds or so?
Yeah, I'll wrap it up. I just want to say law of attraction really helped me because he said, we are love, we are creative, we are almost the verb, and we forget that. And 10 men all have visions maybe for an island. And the problem with the world is that 9 of them will immediately start looking at the lack of that vision being there and attract more of that kind of frequency. But the person who keeps his eye on the light, on the truth, has the power of the universe behind him. And so and the Course in Miracles also says that we're all going to get it eventually. It's just, do we want to learn through love or fear? It's all going to happen. And which gets down to the point of, if we all know that we're going to be taken care of, what a waste of time worry and all this time we do anxiety. If we just, as law of attraction says, if we just knew the train was going to get there, we might have fun on the train. And so I would like to replace my fear with faith. I'm going to try to find a purpose because it's easier for me to do that than to just have faith. But I'm not giving up yet. I'm 60. So thank you for letting me share.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Julie. I think it's a very large theme. We had a beautiful presentation by a dancer who put it very beautifully. She was saying that, this fear, it's basically fear versus love. These are two exactly opposite motivations. And if you're afraid, you're kind of like this. Both within yourself, you're not looking at yourself deeply enough. You're afraid to look inside you. And you're also afraid of other people. So you're not open to other people. So you're like this. And what she's saying is that if you move from that position, which is a defensive position, to an open position where you're open to discovering whatever it is about you and open to other people, it's like spreading your wings, and then you can really fly. So that was a very beautiful presentation, and the video of that is there on our 52 Living Ideas YouTube channel. So what I'm going to do now is I want to take a break where people can discuss amongst themselves all the ideas that have been discussed. I'm going to put about two of the people who are presented in each of the small breakout rooms. We'll do breakout rooms only for 20 minutes, and then we'll come back here to continue the presentations, starting the breakout rooms now. All right, welcome back, folks. All right, so what we're going to do is now we're going to go through next presentations. And what I'm going to do is that I want to make sure that I gave enough time for people to present those 5 minutes. So we will do as many presentations, maybe 4 or 5 presentations today. And next time, firstly, I'm completely blown away by the presentations, the variety and just the thoughtfulness. It's just incredible. And I think these are amazing. So what I want to do is I'm going to do the same thing next time. So if for any reason, if we can't get to you today, I'm going to give you priority next time. Okay. So we're going to start with, I'm going to start this series with System and Design by Donna, followed by Agent-Based Modeling by David. And then we're going to talk about, Dave is going to talk about Ken Burns, and then next one is going to be Victor on Theory of Music. So we'll do these 4 first, and then we will go to the next ones. So first up is going to be Donna with Systems and Design. Donna, go ahead.
Is it okay if I share?
Sure. Give me just a second. Let me go ahead and do that. But Donna, you got 5 minutes, okay?
Okay.
All right, you can share now.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So I have 3 sides of problem solving, which include system thinking, design thinking, and behavioral thinking. So the system thinking is the what. Design thinking is how, and behavioral thinking is the why. So parts of the system thinking, we start off small events, what just happened, and then we look at the patterns and the trends. What has happened? What are the trends over time? What are the patterns? And then from there, we look at the underlying structures. What are the relationships between all of the parts that are making up those trends? And then the most important piece, in my opinion, the mental models. What are people's assumptions, beliefs, and values about the system? And I'm actually going to go through an example that will take us through the system thinking, design thinking, and behavioral thinking. And it's a very sort of light, simplified example. So
Donna, this is very good. So if you want to take up to 7 minutes, feel free to do that.
So COVID-19 is spreading. That's our just simple event. And then what we watch for trends is we see that we have masks and social distancing reduce the spread. Now we're going to look at the relationships. We have a problem. Mask use is not practiced by everyone. So then we look deeper into the mental models to figure out why is everyone not wearing a mask and practicing social distancing. We have the belief that COVID-19 is a hoax and that masks cause COVID. Masks don't work. So that's the surface And we're going to go deeper now. And we looked at design thinking to figure out how are we going to solve the problem? The most important piece in design thinking is observe, observe, observe. That is critical, absolutely critical. Because often what people say and what they do are totally different. Often people are not even aware of why they're doing a certain thing. So when we observe them, we can really see what's happening. And I'll give you another very quick example of observation. The Swiffer was actually invented when designers observed women mopping up the floor and saw how messy and difficult it was, squeezing out the mop and everything. So they came up with the disposable pad that they put on the mop, and it was a wonderful invention. So observation is a wonderful way to solve problems and to innovate. So the next piece, when you empathize with the people within the problem, is to define that problem. Once you define it, then you're going to ideate. And then from there, you come up with a bunch of different ideas, prototype it, and test. And it's very much an iterative process until you find the right solution. So continuing with our example. So observe, basically what we would do is we would shadow the individual Trump supporters to see what is causing their behavior. Why are they behaving the way they do? Just follow them through life to experience life through their eyes. From there, then, so we'll define, what we learn is that Trump supporters actually feel empowered by not wearing a mask. It empowers them. From there, then we'll go to ideate. How can we make masks empowering? How can we persuade Trump to wear a mask? Because actually the other piece of it, I'm just actually going to jump into the behavioral thinking so that we get, because it's connected. We have the why. Why are Trump supporters not wearing masks? Influence, persuasion, key pieces, authority, liking, consistency. So we have Trump supporters love Trump. So with that, Trump has the ability to persuade, but actually the greatest persuasive factor is authority. And this even happened before Trump was president. It was because he was on The Apprentice and seen as a successful businessman. So that actually even helped him to get elected, because it was perceived that that authority got carried over into being president. If he's such a wonderful businessman, then he could be a great president. And then with that, the reason that the Trump supporters do not wear masks is they're also consistent. Consistency is another persuasive factor, is that we want to remain consistent with, when we say we're going to do something, we continue to follow that path, even though we may even know that it's the wrong path, because we started along that path. And then another key influencing piece, consensus. or social proof. What is everyone else doing? All Trump, not all, the other one I could say all, most Trump supporters and their friends, the people that they hang out with, the other Trump supporters, are not wearing masks. So we tend to do what others that we surround ourselves with. Consensus, following that consensus. Going back now to our design thinking, as I said, so we're going to make masks that are empowering. And then another key piece would, how can we persuade Trump to wear a mask? And that would be where we would actually observe Trump to understand him, so we could see what motivates him, and then we could influence him to wear a mask so that he could then influence his supporters. But one example of a prototype that we could use is, what if we showed a video of Trump supporters wearing masks? Again, there goes the social proof. So what would we do then? We would test that particular prototype that we came up with. We would provide masks to Trump supporters in various scenarios after they watched the video and see if that worked. We could try other prototypes. Maybe we would try a 30-second commercial that again showed areas of interest. It would show Trump supporters doing the things that they love, again, showing that influence. So we would come up with various prototypes and we would test and iterate. And we can always go back to behavioral thinking too, looking for those hidden influences. And the other key, as I said, most important always, observe, observe, and observe. And that's the three key pieces to solving a problem.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. Next up is going to be David talking about agent-based modeling. David, go ahead.
And probably halfway through, I'll look to use a visual aid too, Shrikant, so I'll give you a shout halfway through. Okay,
Yes.
But this one, it's about why I'm interested in agent-based modeling, and just a bit of background first. So agent-based modeling is part of complex systems, and complex systems is an area where it's the study of systems that are complex, which is kind of feeds back on itself. But the nature of complex systems that characterize them that they're dynamic. They usually, you can look at them as a network of parts and relationships. So sort of ties into graph theory and mathematics, where you're looking at nodes and vertices. And so you can apply some theory to it. It's non-linear, and that's kind of part of why they're complex. You get unexpected things happening. And the thing that I'm really interested in complex system is emergent behavior. So typically in a complex system, you see things like emergent behavior. So emergent behavior is where you see things emerge from a system that you weren't expecting. So sort of examples are when you see birds flying, that they fly in a certain way, they group together in a certain way. Maybe a good example is communities of ants. They kind of do things that you wouldn't expect one ant to do. They manage to do things, build things that, you know, would probably not be possible by a single ant. You see things like the stock market. That's a good example of emergent behaviors. Things like a stock market crash is something that you wouldn't expect. It's a non-linear behavior in relation to what's happening in the stock market. Traffic congestion, that's an example of emergent behavior from having cars travel down roads. So what I'm getting to is really that complex systems, you can see them everywhere. You know, it could be as simple as just a good jazz band. You see unexpected things come out of that complex system. and it sort of falls into the category of systems that seem to have behaviors that's more than the sum of the parts. So I'm really interested in emergent behaviors because it seems a really interesting thing to get into. And one way of modeling emergent behaviors is what's called agent-based modeling. It's really come to the fore these days because now we have the computing power to do basically what's like an in vitro test on complex systems using agent-based modeling. And the idea with agent-based modeling is, you know, there's a lot of parts that make up a complex system. They have simple behaviors and interactions between each other. And you can model that now fairly easily in computers. And to give you some examples, so this is where I'm going to share my screen. And let's hit that. So can you see that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So this is an example of one tool that's used for agent-based modeling. It's called Netlogo. It's used in complex system courses. And the idea here is it allows you to set up simple behaviors or interactions between agents in a system. So there's an example of a model of COVID infections. And the way this model was set up was defining the behaviors that happen between the agents in the system. So these little people here, and they can set parameters about those behaviors and run the model and see what emergent behaviors they see. So they can see emergent behaviors like infection rates. And the interesting thing is you can do things like change the parameters for the system or those behavioral interactions between the agents and run another model and see what that affects. So what's the effect of everyone wearing masks? What's the effect of half the people wearing masks? You can do those sort of things with this sort of agent-based modeling. Another example, so I talked about birds, the way they fly have emergent behaviors. So the simple behavior we're looking at is birds they have alignment. They like to fly the same direction as other birds that are in their group. They have cohesion, so they have a certain degree of wanting to keep together as a flock. They also want to have separation. They want to avoid things. So you can set that up as a model. And there's birds flying at the moment. This is a program called Boyd's. So I think it must have come from New York. So this is me starting up the program. The birds are just flying. Then I can make changes to the system. So I can put obstacles in the system and see how that affects the behavior of flocks of birds. And again, this is kind of the interesting thing about agent-based modeling is you can test things. So in Donna's presentation, she just talked about going through the design process and then testing as part of that. So instead of having to test in the real society, you could put some sort of model together and test these things out, test it out lots of times, try changing parameters, see what's the most effective approach to take to change behaviors or see a different emergent behavior. And finally, just this agent-based modeling is sort of taking off. This is from, I think not the EPA, the energy department. So they do a lot of agent-based modeling. So this is one thing that they did. It's not really in line with energy, but they do models on changes in the electrical grid. If something goes offline one place, they can use agent-based modeling to see what's the impact of that. But this is a large-scale one that they call Chi-Sim. So these things can be really big just because we've got really high-powered computers these days. So this is an example where they modeled Chicago. There's a lot more data around these days, so you can find much more information about where people live, how they normally interact. So you can get things that are a lot closer to reality. So sort of this really seems to be taking off at the moment, this agent-based modeling and the use you can make of it. So the last part of my presentation, the last 2 minutes I hope, is kind of why I'm interested in agent-based modeling. So just a bit of my background, I'm a retired technologist. Now I love programming. I've always loved programming, so that's kind of what I do. And also my background's in application performance and quality in software. So complex, one thing that's interests me is just complex systems are interesting. It's new to me. It may not be new to some people, but I just find it's really a field that's taken off at the moment. It really gives you a way to analyze things of both, in the natural world and in society. So stock markets, COVID infections, way people act as groups. Because I'm interested in computers, I'm also interested in just the software side of this, is how you can do these simulations. There's a lot more resources these days. So I don't know whether you guys know about GPUs and things, but you can get GPUs with 10,000 compute units in it just in your PC. So it's a great target for applying to do this agents-based modeling, where you can have these 10,000 CPUs firing away, acting as independent agents. It's a really open area at the moment. So again, this may be just my bias, but you can go out there, look in GitHub, look into open source code, even that Chai simulation and the system used to run it, that's all open source, available to people to play with. So it's just a great area to be in at the moment, because you're not blocked by costs and things like that. You can go out and play in these things. And the last part is just the quality side of it. So part of what I used to do is look at how do you validate systems. So it's an important thing when you put a model together, is validate that it's actually doing what you think it is and should do. It's no good putting a COVID infection model together and find it doesn't match reality. You make assumptions, you change parameters, and you get the wrong results. You want to know, hey, if I increase mask wearing by 75%, this is the emergent behavior that I should get. So that's it. It's really just about why I'm interested in this subject.
Excellent, David. Thank you very much, both Donna and David. I mean, that was just incredible presentations. Really appreciate that. So David, can you stop sharing your screen?
Okay, there we go.
So folks, what I've done is that a couple of the regulars have volunteered to kind of stand back, so that everybody who volunteered to present will get to present. Okay, so we're going to go through it, try to keep it to about 5 minutes so we can get through everybody. So next up is going to be Mike. Mike, go ahead. You got 5 minutes.
I was impressed with the fact that you're going to address and resolve the problem of our political malaise this Saturday. And so I modified my my presentation.
Okay, let me just tell people about that. I'm going to do a discussion on Saturday at this is going to be 12:30 p.m. Eastern time, on how do we heal our nation. I think this has been very surprising. It's like half the people are one way, half the people are the other way, and like too many of the in each of the camp don't actually understand where the other camp is even coming from. But it's a fact that there are half the other people, and it's not right to just dismiss them. I think it's important to understand that. So that's what it's going to be. It's very difficult thing, Martin, absolutely. It's a very difficult thing to do that, but we have a culture here in these meetups of actually discussing things with great deal of civility, and even disagreeing with people in a courteous way. So the question that I'm posing on Saturday for anybody who wants to answer, how do we heal our nation? The motto of E pluribus unum, that in many one, is a foundation of America, and it's foundation of actually civilization. That's what that's what is needed to make civilization happen. And we are making it happen. I mean, regardless of politics. But so that's the question. How do we heal? And so that look forward to talking about it. Mike, thanks for bringing it up, and let's so take it away.
Okay, as a starting point, I wanted to say a few words about what systems theory and neuroscience have to say about all this stuff. An underlying question, maybe the underlying question, if we are rational sentient beings, why can't we agree on the politics of this problem? Now, neuroscience does believe our brain is a deterministic computing engine. And why does it appear to be subject to so many uncertain, even irrational decisions? And everybody's decision is uncertain and irrational, of course, except for mine. So and underlying this, we can discuss: do we have free will? Is the brain deterministic, or do we have just the illusion that we have free will and the brain is deterministic? And now we just had a presentation on agent-based modeling that says that complexity theory says that a completely deterministic system can appear to generate random behavior. Modeling by Wolfram's Mathematica allows some very simple rule-based systems to be set up that create amazing results. Maybe some of them are even true. Similarly, chaos theory does that. Now, why does this happen? Because if the brain is deterministic, why does it appear to be random? Now, the reason for that is that there are some problems that grow in complexity and in solvability linearly. Some problems grow as n squared. Some problems grow exponentially. Now, problems that involve successive decisions grow factorially, and the amazing thing about factorials is they really explode rapidly. 25 factorial gives you a number so big that it's the number of nanoseconds since the Big Bang. So so that's why some of these things appear indeterminate. Laplace came up with this concept of Laplace's demon. If you tell me everything about the initial conditions and the state of the system, I can predict its behavior forever. That's a beautiful theory, but you can't do that with today's technology. So the question still remains: how did the 3 pounds of oatmeal that we have between our ears gives us an understanding of this problem? The problem, some experts think, and I can quote names like Roger Penrose and Donald Hoffman, say that the fact is that we do not understand what reality is really all about. Reality is driven by the limitations of our brain. It's done by the limitations of our senses, and it's done by the fact that we each have entered the system at a different point. and we don't necessarily understand. We don't understand the system. We develop heuristics, and these are our belief systems. What is a heuristic? It's an oversimplified model of our map of reality. It's usually wrong, but it gives us a workable basis of how to live life and get out of bed in the morning. Now, the reason why they seem unpredictable is initial conditions and boundary conditions, and our perception of reality is different for all of us. We all have, this is a variant of Plato's allegory of the cave, where we say we don't really see reality as it is. We have a perception of reality as shadows of incomplete information on the walls of the cave. Now, a related thing, Penrose says there are quantum effects going on in our brain. And he describes the concept of microtubules, that how that works. Now, does that mean it's indeterministic? No, it doesn't mean it's indeterministic, because well, Einstein made a comment, and I had an argument that he carried into his death, that God doesn't play dice with the universe. But yet we observe all this uncertainty. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, Pauli's exclusion principle, spooky action at a distance.
Mike, can you wrap it up in about 30 seconds?
I'll wrap it up right now.
Okay, thank you.
Let me give 2 sentences. What happens is, the reason why we think quantum mechanics is uncertain is we don't really understand the state of all these systems. And it may be that we can't understand the state of all these systems because some of them are in some of the other parts of the system are in another multiverse. And the brain may be, okay, one more thought. If you're a Democrat, you believe that Biden having won Michigan and Wisconsin is our next president. If you're a Republican, Trump having won every single state, including Michigan and Wisconsin, except maybe California and New York, is going to be the next president. We have something like the hanging Chad problem of 2000 that is going to have to be ironed out by the Supreme Court.
Mike, let's not get into that, okay? We'll stick to it.
Modeling.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Always appreciate your erudition. You're able to bring in kind of history of different ideas. You're able to bring it all together. So really appreciate that. So now we're going to have Miguel is going to talk about the insular cases, then special relativity by Robert, then give me just a second here. Special relativity by Robert, then Raspberry Pi by Rich, and Love of Power by Akavi. Okay, all right, very good. So next up is going to be Miguel. Miguel, go ahead.
All right. So I didn't know that the conversation was going to go in this direction. So it's fortunate that we ended up here. So I'm going to start with a little background on why we feel emotional about some of his topics. And it has to do with the sense of justice. We, as individuals, we see that things go around and happen around us. And we feel that the system, external system, has betrayed our sense of justice. in my case in particular, I, as general American citizenship waits for the results. I'm sitting here on a U.S. territory, as also are the other territories, American Samoa, Guam, North Mariana Islands, and Puerto Rico, with the situation that we're not allowed to vote for the US president. So that's a significant sense of inequality and hence a sense of injustice. So I throw out this question for the group: is this just? I mean, in the sense of global sense of justice, is this just that a group of Americans is disenfranchised from the concept of constitutional rights, and in this case, the vote? So went back and visited with some old friends, Plato, Aristotle, and other philosophers, and they have viewed justice from different angles. In some case, they have looked at it from the psychological aspect, in some cases from the natural aspect. In the case of John Stuart Mill, they was utilitarian, so it's the consensus. So we have distributed justice, retributive justice, restorative justice, and all those different views of justice, to going back to what other past members were saying, is to justify our position in favor or against certain situation. So as a society, we make decisions based upon this construct, philosophical construct of what justice is and what is fair and what's just. So in this particular case, the US territories were purchased or invaded or acquired. And in the 1950s, when Alaska and Hawaii became states, those territories took in this case, the ability to vote for president. Meanwhile, the other territories were left out of the equation, and they have been battling back and forth on this doctrine called the insular cases, in which the federal government stated that unincorporated territories are to be ruled by the federal government. And this is unfortunate, and as I said, it's unfair. And I think that as we see people protesting for different reasons, I invite the group to examine ourselves in the position of power that we are, by holding votes and by creating a co-created future that addresses different levels of inequality, whatever we believe that might be. But I will take the opportunity and maybe join the conversation again when we retake the topic of how do we get here, because there is a large opportunity of bridging the divide. And as I was listening to the previous presentation, we have different lenses. So we either break the lenses all throughout or create common lenses so that we can see the same external reality. And that's another exercise I invite the group to do with people that are on the opposite side of the fence. And I think that's it. I have like 30 seconds to go. Thank you.
Wonderful. Miguel, I want to say something. I think this was very good. It was very touching, because what happens is that, most people live their lives and they are not aware of many of the injustices. Like, I think we Americans on this mainland do not think much about the territories. It's not there in our consciousness. It's not, but when I hear you talk, I can see the pain. I think justice is important. Justice between human beings is important. And it operates at so many different levels. And people are aware of justice only at some levels. But at the same time, when another human being actually can, connect to you as a human being, you can see some things by a dialogue, and it kind of expands your concept of what is proper, what is just, because you can see an application in your own life of something that the other person is faced. So that's really beautifully put. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that.
Well, I forgot to mention that there is this group of people is over almost 4 million people that I'm talking about. It's not just one or two. It's a large group of people that are affected by this situation. So
Absolutely.
I stand with all of them.
Absolutely. But I mean, the interesting thing is, like, when you look at kind of, this is the theme. What happens is that people tend to be kind of in group focused, so they don't see the full nature of other groups in a deep enough way. And you find that, what shall I say? Somebody, how to put it? You kind of have to open your heart and open your mind and look and have a lot of conversations with a lot of people in order to see kind of, see all of it. This happens across the level. I grew up in India, for example. India has caste system, and it is so deeply built in that people do not even think that they are doing any kind of injustice, but they are doing enormous amount of injustice to enormous number of people all the time. But so that was very good, and it was wonderful to bring that up, because see, what we're trying to do is that we're trying to explore all aspects of the human experience. So with that, let's go next to special relativity. Robert, go ahead. Robert, you need to unmute yourself. Are you there? Give me a second. All right. Next up is, give me just a second. I just want to make sure. Okay. Next up is going to be Rich with Raspberry Pi.
Yes. Yeah, I just wanted to talk about a retirement activity that I've been learning about. And it's related to the Raspberry Pi. I thought this is a small one card PC. I thought it would be fun and useful to learn about, use this as a technique to learn about Linux, database systems, web servers, etc. I had a technical background, but I didn't get heavily into this, and this was an opportunity. First, a little background. What is Raspberry Pi? For those of you who don't know, it's a small, low power, low cost, single board PC. It was originally developed to teach children about programming and computers. It was developed in the UK, and it typically uses the variant of the Linux operating system. The latest version of this computer is quite capable now, and it supports quite a number of features, and it could probably almost equate to a modest, or a low power home PC. It supports Office-like suite of programs, web browser, email, etc. The hardware, just so that you know, it's, maybe a board this big. It's got Ethernet, Wi-Fi built in, 4 USB ports, HDMI for the monitor, and audio output. And one unique aspect of the system is the storage. The operating system, the software, and the data can all be stored on a single micro SD card. It's the same type of card that you have in digital cameras. and it just slides right into the board. And this makes full backups both easy and foolproof. You just basically take the system, copy it to the board, and pull the card out and save it. Given the low power, it can be kept on all the time and therefore used in a sort of server mode. You can use something called Real VNC software to remotely access this device. So really you can leave it on your table and just have a power connection, nothing else. And you can access it from another laptop or PC. And aside from the initial setup, this eliminates the need for a separate or an additional monitor, mouse, and keyboard. What have I done so far? I've used it to set up an Apache web server with MySQL database. I've used the PHP scripting web development language to basically provide remote web page based user-friendly access to the database. Databases such as, a movie database for films we've watched, have a database to find things in my house, just excuses for learning about the SQL and how to use that and how to make it user-friendly. And also configuring the firewall and the browser whitelist and blacklist capabilities to really make to sort of reduce the chances of malware attacks for the device. My most recent project idea, to learn more, is sort of spurred a little bit by the current COVID crisis, is to build a self-contained local system using the Raspberry Pi as a platform for use by small businesses to create websites for small businesses. The goal here, and the reason I think this is because during the pandemic, with a lot of people losing their job, there will be a lot of people trying to start up small businesses. So this might be helpful. The design goal being to provide small business owners who have limited financial and technical resources a standalone website where they don't have to go to a separate cloud-based service provider. They can do it on their own if they want, for cost and security reasons. And the personal motivation is, I have found that any learning experience is a lot easier if I have a focused goal, something that I'm trying to achieve. So the design requirements is first, low cost, obviously, and second, minimal technical and financial requirements on the end user. I'm going to have a number of typical site characteristics and features to the site, and I could use input from others about it, but basically providing the typical stuff: about page, contact information, hours, etc. I'm planning to also make sure that this allows the platform will meet the user's needs by providing initial user and networks configuration through user-friendly means, and also updates using the same thing. And I want to have a separate draft and production versions of the configuration information and the user information, so that the user can enhance their system without impacting the live system that I have. And and other things like backup and scheduling of software updates. Anyway, that's what I'm planning to do, and it'll be interesting to get input from others on how to design it.
Absolutely. Wonderful, wonderful. Rich, that was fantastic. I remember going to Makers Fair here in New York, where there was this entire large pavilion for people who are working with Raspberry Pis. And it is just incredible to see how that little thing can be used in just a whole variety of things. And also, I like the idea of that Maker's Pavilion. And in some senses, these meetups are about that. You get people who are enthusiasts, like today's meetup, right? You have people bringing all their ideas, and then there is a tremendous cross-pollination of it. It is much more focused in this pavilion for Raspberry Pi enthusiasts. But that conversation, and because each person figures out some way of using it, and they share that with each other, so that they come up with ideas which they had not individually thought of. So thank you very much. Last three presentations are going to be Love of Power by Akavi, Ken Burns by Dave, and Criminal Justice System by Joe. Akavi, go ahead.
Okay, for the love of power, I think that's a very big topic to me. It sounds amazing and thrilling for me, but I like the whole configuration. So I just put it out like for the power by itself. People who are powerful is innate or is natural? Do we born with powerful control, or do we take it from the society? But or do the people who are born leader, or is the learned behavior? If we ask that question, and if we put that question out there, you can see that power become like some kind of Gary. Some people, they don't, and then they become like a God in a way where they don't want to listen to nobody. They become rebellious. And in their rebellious, sometimes they just completely get out of the way. So I'm relating this like, if this can be like you get, before you get elected, you have some kind of view in your head, you get elected, and then you become all powerful, and you compare yourself to like number one, and then you hold on to this power. Sometimes you don't want to give it away. You just want to hold on to it. So I'm looking at it like, is it a possession? Like something just get out of the way as people hold on to power, but is for me just to get deeper and deeper. Is a very interesting for a topic for me to dig in. I probably will get more and talk about that later. It's just something that is I'm curious to know what it can lead to, and how people can let go and some other people hold on to it until they die. That's it.
Thank you, Akavi. The best thing that I've seen on this is actually primatology. The primatology research, because there is a lot of commonality between how the power structures work between human beings and primates. And you can see that in primates far more easily, far more directly, far more at a distance. And then you can see them operating in people. So I would definitely recommend, there is a guy called Van de Waal, I think, who is like one of the most famous primatologists, who studied, chimpanzees and gorillas and bonobos and how power operates in them. So I would recommend that. But thank you very much. Jairo, I'm sorry I skipped you. You're next. So Jairo will be talking about his experience of learning Tibetan, and then it'll be Dave and Joe. Jairo, go ahead.
So yes, I'm struggling to learn Tibetan, and I'm not a very consistent student. What I'm doing is learning the alphabet, and since it's pretty phonetic, to learn to read it, and doesn't have to be pronounced correctly, but to mostly to read it and be able to translate it into English, because what's motivating me is that they say that out of or in Tibet, what they did is they preserved Indian knowledge, like that was at its height around, say, like the 6th century. And so Tibet wanted to civilize its people, so it brought Indian knowledge, which is from Nalanda University and some others. They were like monastic universities, and they held a knowledge about consciousness. And so they have a wealth of knowledge, and they say that there's 200,000 texts in Tibetan that were translated from Sanskrit to Tibetan, or commentaries on it. And so it hasn't, only 5% has been translated so far, and not much of it very well. So I feel like they say there's a demand for people to learn Tibetan, which is not a language you want to learn because a lot of people speak it. Only like maybe 6 million speak it in the world. So you probably would rather, or they tell me, why don't you learn Chinese? There's like 1 billion or more, like a quarter of the world speaks it. So yeah, I did try to learn some Chinese, and that kind of helps me see another perspective, or a comprehensivism about languages themselves. Like I see that Chinese is, well, when you learn Chinese, for us Westerners, you would want to learn using pinyin. That's like Romanized version of it, where you can read it and be able to pronounce it. And then you don't want to learn the characters until very later, when you're maybe fluent in speaking it. And then learning the characters, that's a whole lifetime, or at least 2 years to learn at least maybe a few hundred or so. And then you can go from there and read a newspaper in Chinese. But on the other hand, Tibetan is more like learn to recognize, memorize the alphabet and pronounce it more or less, and combine them together like molecules, or like atoms and molecules, and read it more or less, and learn the vocabulary, and then you got it, and you should be able to do that in a month or two. Well, for me, it's been taken 3 or 4 years, but I'm not very consistent. So I go in spurts and then go do something else. But yeah, I've enjoyed learning it, and some of the things that I also explored is how similar it is to Sanskrit and languages from India, but nothing in the peoples are the same, like the root of their languages, like Indian languages might be considered Indo-Aryan languages, the root, but Tibetan, it has its own root. It's like Tibeto-Burman, and it's distantly similar to Chinese, I've learned. And so it's totally different. But the Tibetans kind of borrowed ideas from the Sanskrit, the Devanagari script, and they came up with their own, except they use a pen that you go like this, and like a bamboo pen that's cut in and cut, and then when you go like, and then you twist it, and so you get those sharp lines. Have you seen the Om Mani Padme Hum that people tattoo on their arms or whatever, or on their back, or because that looks real neat. And so, but at least so far, what I've gotten is that I can figure out, like seeing Tibetan scripts, and can figure out, read it more or less. There's some parts that are complicated, but at least what I want you to get out of this is that the similarities between like Sanskrit-based scripts and Tibetan is they have these marks over their characters, their consonants, and they put let's see, four marks, and they say that each consonant has an inherent vowel sound, and it's all ah. So like the letter B, you don't say like in English A B C D E F. They would say ah ba sa da. It's all ah ah ah.
Mhm.
And then when you want to make it go into the B sound, then you put a mark over the letter B, and that gives it the E sound. So it go B. So it's then they either put it on top. There's two on top, and three on top, and one on the bottom. And you can see that in Sanskrit characters too. So
Thank
that's all
you.
for now.
Thank you, Hiro. I like your enthusiasm for languages, and I think the idea of language families is very amazing. I have a friend who actually writes in 9 different languages, publishes in 9 different languages. And it's the most interesting approach to languages that I've seen, because he knows so many languages from so many different families. Like when I told him that I grew up speaking Marathi, he said, okay, tell me a few words from it. And then because he knows the entire many languages from the Indo-European family, of which Marathi is a part, he was able to kind of triangulate very, very fast. So what do you call, how do you count from 1 to 10? What do you say to mother or father? And he was able to, oh, then you must be saying this for that. And just so within a space of like half an hour, he was able to kind of navigate very quickly, because you have these, it's a family. And so it's a very interesting concept, like knowing, if you know multiple languages, you can do some things that other people can't. So wonderful. Next up is Dave, followed by Joe. Dave, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Shrikant. And first, I want to compliment you on this project Saturday. I had not noticed it yet, but we really need this. It's not just the last 4 years. We've had 30 or 40 years of way too
Let's
much
not talk much about
partisanship.
this. Let's talk about that on Monday, on Saturday.
Okay, yeah, no, I agree. I don't want to get off track, but I do want to talk about learning. And I think we all like a story. I think a story is a great way for learning and entertainment. And I'll go back to my argument with CJ about fiction and nonfiction. But in fiction, we've got movies and of course novels and everything else. But to learn about our country and travel, our society and problems, we need to stick with nonfiction about what's going on. And to me, that is usually the form we call a documentary. Sometimes it's a movie like Michael Moore's Bowling for Columbine about the high school shootings. But learning about our country. The most famous one, that's the one I mentioned first, is Ken Burns. And the first one I remember, and it's one not a lot of people have seen, I believe, although I just saw it on TV, but about the Statue of Liberty. And it was in 1976 in connection with the bicentennial. And talked about it as the cooperation between France and America. And the French wanted to commemorate, they respected our democracy and they tried to model theirs after ours. But an artist by the name of Bartholdi came up with the sculpture, and he needed a structure inside to hold it up. And he saw this Eiffel Tower thing, and he found Gustave Eiffel and said, "Will you, build a model or a small Eiffel Tower inside my sculpture?" And so they did that. But the American contribution was to build a pedestal to put it on. Could just put it down on the ground. It's not nearly as impressive as it is up in the air. And the developers had a heck of a time trying to come up with the money to build a crazy pedestal to put the sculpture on. And so then the editor of the New York Tribune, Horace Greeley, who was famous for the expression, "Go west, young man, go west," offered if anybody would give at least a penny, he would publish their name in his paper. So finally raised the money to build the pedestal to put up the structure. And that's the kind of thing that I just love about these Ken Burns documentary. You just learn so much minutia and interest. The most famous of his documentaries, most of you probably have heard about, was the one about the Civil War. And he personalized it so much. He had letters that these officers had written back to their wives. And of course, he had pictures and this beautiful music. And so it was just a wonderful way to learn. The other thing about the Statue of Liberty is he always brings in our social problems. He interviewed several African-American activists. And of course, they're upset about bringing over here slavery to our country, and they still do not feel equal. In fact, there was a beautiful quotation from somebody just a few weeks ago that I love my country, but my country doesn't love me. And so, I mean, this is one of many, many problems we have to solve. But anyway, the Civil War, and another one I mentioned before in one of our meetups was his series on the national parks. A great series of documentaries. But I also love documentaries about other things. In fact, I have 3 or 4 hours queued up in my digital video recorder, Journeys Across India. I'm anxious to watch, and then maybe I'll have some questions for Srikant. I've watched a wonderful series about Africa. And also in travel, you may have heard of Anthony Bourdain, was a cook in New York, and somehow he talked a cable system into sponsoring him to travel all over the world and experience cooking. But the main thing was sitting down with the natives, talking to them, trying to understand their culture and helping them to understand our culture. And one of the most beautiful things I recommend, he was in Vietnam at the same time Barack Hussein Obama, our president at the time, was there visiting. And of course, the Vietnamese didn't know President Obama. So Obama and Anthony Bourdain were sitting down in this little Vietnamese cafe, shooting the breeze over lunch, eating or having a brewski. And for the first time, Obama was not being bothered by anybody and just had a heck of a time. But anyway, that's my great love. Of course, last 9 months, my great love has been 52 Living Ideas. But hopefully we'll get back to the real world one of these days. But I really recommend try the documentary format. Good way to learn. Thank you very much, Srikant.
Thank you, Dave. I have to tell you that the person who actually invented this format of long form documentaries is David Attenborough, and the second he started out because when he came up with the idea of documentary, everybody laughed at him. Because back then, they thought that you could not hold attention of a person for more than half an hour, and then you had to make them laugh in order to hold their attention. So he said, no. It's, I can do like 1 hour pieces, 13 series, of that. And they thought they were crazy. He was crazy. So when BBC Two started, they made him the program director because it was just this new channel. And he used that opportunity to pioneer this. So the second documentary in that series is my favorite documentary of all times. And that's Ascent of Man by Jacob Bronowski. It is an amazing portrayal, amazing documentation of how we learned about the world and how we transform the world. So it is those documentaries, initial documentaries, including David Attenborough's his own documentary, Life on Earth, really uses the visual medium to show you, it's uses it in a conceptual way. And Ascent of Man is like the best of the best. I've not seen anything of that caliber. I like very much like, Ken Burns documentaries, especially the one on jazz, which is my favorite of his. But Ascent of Man, I recommend very highly. Next up is Joe. Joe, go ahead. Oh, Joe had to leave.
No.
Are you there? Okay.
I'm there. Yeah, no, I just had to unmute for a minute. Okay. Sorry about that. So I'll just keep it brief because everybody else has been wonderful this evening. But thing that I've been exploring is the U.S. criminal justice system, and there's a very well-known statistic that the U.S. represents 4.5% of the world's population, yet it has about 22% of the world's prison population, which is completely out of balance. And one of the things that I really think that there are two reasons as to why this is important is first, and actually Miguel had mentioned the concept of justice, but the idea that basically if you're going to have a civil society, that you need one that is just and that applies justice equally. And I think much of the unrest that we see today is a result of the injustices that exist within the criminal justice system, and primarily the ability to reintegrate into the system and be a participant in society once someone has been convicted of a crime. The other is that I think it's very important to understand as to why people may have committed a crime to begin with. Instead of just looking at the crime, that it's very important to understand the motivations to see what may be a systemic problem within the system. Now, when I look at criminal justice, I try, and I'm open to changing my framework, but generally I look at it from three different standpoints. I look at it from an ethical standpoint. Is the system being administered justly and equitably? The second is an economic standpoint, the cost to society as a whole. And then the third is a systemic standpoint that actually looks at the entire system to see if there's a reason as to why this is starting to occur. And with you having such an imbalance of 22% of the world's prison population, that seems to indicate that there would be a systemic issue. So I'll just go through some of the ideas using the framework that I just laid out. Was the idea from an ethical standpoint. From an ethical standpoint, there's one statistic that really a few statistics that jumped out at me, is that one was that 80% of the people that have a criminal record have not had adequate representation with their public defenders. So that many of these individuals that don't have the resources to defend themselves. This subsequently then results in what? Somebody that is unable to get a job, or if they are to be able to get a job, they're at a significantly disadvantaged in getting a job opportunity, getting housing, or even getting a loan. So they're not really able to participate in the rest of society. And I think that that's really, it speaks to, it starts to impact the entire system of justice. Like, and it inhibits people's ability to participate in our justice system. There's another moral component that or I should say ethical component to this as well, is that there are a number of children that have a parent that's been incarcerated. So when I say 2.7 million children have a parent that is currently incarcerated. Now, 5 million children have had a parent that's been incarcerated at a different point in time. Now, this has an enormous impact on poverty and people's lives, and innocent people's lives and families. So the effect on families has actually been, horrific. The third area that I would, cover as far as from an ethical standpoint that really jumps out at me is people's ability, people with disabilities that end up being convicted of crimes. Many times people have mental disabilities, vision, hearing, cognitive, as I mentioned, but the problem with that is that we're punishing people instead of actually helping them reform. And then they go into a system, and that inevitably will turn out badly, where it starts to really, you have a recidivism, and then you have this cycle that actually starts to impact the system as a whole. Now, the economic impact of it is actually, somewhat staggering. There was one study done locally here at Villanova, and I haven't been able to really substantiate the numbers that they have said, they claim, but they say that the poverty rate increases by about 20% over the past 25 years, I think, or maybe it's 35 years, that because of incarceration. So that people's inability to participate in society and the inability to earn. So a person that has been incarcerated will make 60% less than those, are actually 40% less than those that are regular participants in society. And this technically also, I'm trying to look at one of my other statistics that would jump out at me. I'm sorry. But anyway, there's another cost. There's an actual cost to the taxpayers that it costs to house these individuals, and that's about $80 billion annually. And in employment losses and contributions to GDP, there's about $65 billion annually. And I hate to break these down to just economic issue numbers because this is such a human rights topic. But, that's part of the facts, is that we're spending all this money and it's being misallocated, and people are, suffering with with these expenditures. And we act as, sometimes we're people on the margins. We act, we seem to be very dismissive of those things. The last thing is that, some of the systemic issues that I had kind of thought about is the ability for occupational licensing is a major problem for people to get licenses to actually reintegrate into society. I think that there are incentives from the prosecutorial end of things where people are it's incentivized to prosecute individuals as opposed to actually get them the help they need. And I think we just really need to rethink how public policy and how reform is really done. But in closing, I will say that there's a lot of people that are addressing this issue currently. And I think I'm encouraged by that. However, I think that it's really important to take a comprehensivist approach to this issue. Otherwise, we won't be solving the problem at its core. And I think that there are there are economic issues, there are judicial issues, there are prosecutorial issues, there are actual prison issues with how people are being actually given the skill sets to reintegrate into society. And the thing that's very interesting to me is I think there are simple policy changes that can help a lot of people right away. A lot of people look at this problem and say, this is just too difficult. But there are some simple fixes to the system. I think in decriminalizing certain activities, not over-criminalizing, for nonviolent offenders, not putting them in a position where they can't work. I think that these are very minor changes that can impact half the prison population. 750,000 members of our current prison population are disabled. They have some physical, cognitive disability. So I think that if you're able to classify people differently and treat them differently in the sense that in a more humane way, that I think that you can make large scale changes very simply. And I think that that's where I'll leave it for now.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Joe. So folks, this has been just incredible. So each of you, Mike, Kevin, Sanjay, Jean, Kavi, Dave, Donna, Barry, Jairo, Joe, David, Rich, and Julie. I mean, it's been great. And all the people, who had to leave early. This is just incredible. So I'm going to do this every month. Once a month, I will do this. You're welcome to, keep talking about whatever it is that you're working on. I think all of us benefit tremendously. So next time I'm going to do a topic that I've kept on postponing because I'd use that as a stop, kind of like the one that I really feel passionate about, and that's going to be on Mortimer Adler's project on the Syntopicon. Basically, this is based on the Great Books. This is the Great Books project, where he took all the philosophers, scientists, novelists, historians, psychologists, just everybody, all thinkers of the West, and tried to ask the question, what do they talk about? And he identified these 103 great ideas. It's the most amazing thing. So I'm going to couple that with his idea from how to read a book called syntopical reading. And I see this, his Syntopicon, which is one of the volumes of the Great Books, where he has all these ideas. I'm going to be talking about that. I've spent 2-3 years studying that and have done about 50 meetups on the various ideas of that. So I want to do that in a far more interactive way, so that you can see what it means, to be using and kind of treating that entire Western corpus as your base for thinking. All right, so that's coming up next Wednesday.
That's cool.
Hope to see you folks soon. Bye.